Hello and welcome to Tête-à-Tête, France 24's flagship interview show. Our guest today is the Director General of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I have to begin with what's happening in the Middle East, in Gaza. How concerned are you about the impact of what's happening on the Palestinian economy and on regional economies?
It is a horrible tragedy, what is happening to civilians, what happened first in Israel, and now the consequences for those affected are horrendous. From a point of view of impact on the economy, of course, the epicenter of the war is where it is most severe for Gaza, but also for West Bank. And there are impacts on the Israeli economy because 8% of the labor force is now mobilized in the army. When we look at the next ring of impact, the neighboring countries, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, they have had their share of difficulties. Jordan is most resilient, yet many Palestinians live there. They have hosted Syrian refugees. We just completed staff-level agreement with Jordan for a new program, 1.2 billion, a buffer for the Jordanian economy. We have a program with Egypt. We are looking into ways to build even more support for Egypt.
Meaning more money, possibly?
Possibly, yes, possibly, because obviously circumstances have changed. Tourism is impacted. We expect to see investment climate impacted. And then we look at the rest of the world. 2 points. One, so far, the impact has been minimal. There was a spike of oil prices and gas prices in the immediate aftermath. They have since retreated, especially oil prices. But the longer this war goes on, the higher the risk of spillover, the higher the risk of an accident that can then create risks for the world economy. Two, we need to remember where we are. We have lived through COVID, then the war in Ukraine, then cost of living crisis. Inflation is still fairly high, it hasn't returned to target. Growth is very weak. We haven't even recovered from the impact of COVID, with the exception of the United States. Almost all other countries are below their pre-COVID trend, meaning every shock that comes hits an economy that is weakened. Growth is weak, 3% for this year. We projected at 3% for the next years. Anxiety is not what the world needs. So may this war ends as fast as possible.
Right, because yes, there is, as you mentioned, all those crises. We could also add China-US tensions over the economy. You mentioned inflation. Are you concerned especially about inflation in poor countries? In Europe, there are mechanisms to alleviate the impact, or in the US, but not in those countries.
Of course, we are concerned about that. Why are we concerned? One, because the debt levels have gone up everywhere. They're particularly heavy on the shoulders of poor countries. Two, because the high interest rates that are necessary to contain inflation make it so much more difficult for these countries to meet the needs of their people. And on top of it, their currencies depreciate. And then when currencies depreciate, whatever you import is more expensive. If we have any sense of responsibility, we should be working towards reducing tensions in the world for these countries and for every one.
You mentioned the issue of debt. There was, or there still is, it might not be totally finalized, an agreement with Zambia, with its lenders. This was seen as maybe a template for other countries. Some in Africa especially have been very vocal about debt cancellation. What is your position and the fund's position on this very sensitive issues for many countries, especially in poor areas of the world?
We have been engaged with debt restructuring from the very beginning of COVID, when COVID started pressing up debt levels. We called for debt service suspension together with the World Bank. And we were very active in promoting what is now called the Common Framework for Debt Resolution. Why? Because while there is not an immediate, at least, risk of serious debt crisis for the world, there is a huge risk for low-income countries at or near debt distress. And we are talking about more than 50% of low-income countries. What we have achieved so far should not be neglected. The Paris Club, the IMF, the World Bank, G20, we have worked on creating systematic approach to debt resolution, and that has led to gradually accelerating progress. Every case that follows moves faster than the previous one. Chad, 11 months. Zambia, 9 months. Sri Lanka, 6 months. Ghana, 5 months. Now we want to see cutting even further down this period of time. Not easy. Why? Because the creditor landscape changed so much. There are new creditors like China, Saudi Arabia, India, Brazil. There are many more private sector creditors. When you have to restructure debt with so many around the table, it is not an easy proposition. But progress is being made. And boy, do we need to persist to get more of it.
Right. The poor countries are also demanding more of the so-called special drawing rights. Mm-hmm. This is the IMF currency, if I may use this expression, although it oversimplifies what it is. But the G20s had announced $100 billion. You said that, yes, we had reached a target, but some are saying, no, that's not true. The money is not there, as has been the case for climate change and so on. The rich promise a lot, they don't deliver much.
The money is there.
Really? 100 billion?
We have, actually, the pledges have exceeded 100 billion. What do we have? Let's account for it. At the IMF, we have mobilized $55 billion of debt on lending of SDRs for our Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust. This is the instrument with which we lend with zero interest rate to low-income countries. We have mobilized over $40 billion for the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. So, yes, the money would take time to be disbursed because obviously we are not going to throw it at once. The money is there. And because we now have even more than 100 billion, we are working with regional development banks to see whether we can do even more.
Last issue, COP28 is around the corner there again. I mentioned it earlier, 100 billion a year was promised here in Paris back in 2015. It never happened, but even beyond that, the needs for underdeveloped countries or poor countries, by 2030, I understand it's over $2.4 trillion. I mean, how do you get there? I mean, the money is not there.
Well, let me first be clear that the $100 billion of on-lending SDRs are here. And it took less than 2 years to get to that point. You're absolutely right. The world is in a critical need to mobilize financing for emerging markets and developing economies, because if we don't, then they would increase their emissions, and it doesn't matter what France achieves in reducing its own emissions, we will be cooked. Is this possible? Of course it is possible. We actually looked into what can be achieved domestically. If countries mobilize through improved taxation more money from those who can pay, they can get up to 8% of GDP in additional domestic capacity. We also want to see domestic currency markets work better, so countries can issue bonds and they can build up their own financial capacity. But then, of course, we need money to come from outside. At the fund, we look at it as a matter of making sure that countries are well-governed, have strong institutions, have good policies, and they're attractive for more capital to flow. It is not going to be a silver bullet for the climate crisis. It would take all of us holding hands and, above all, working together, cooperating. When we go to COP, please let's leave our differences aside. Stop pointing fingers, hold hands.
Kristalina Georgieva, thank you very much for being our guest here on France 24, and thank you all for watching this show.